Judge Vanessa Brooks, step away from the bench immediately. The words struck the courtroom like a thunderclap. Every conversation stopped. Every chair became still. Even the reporters seated along the back wall seemed to forget how to breathe. For a brief moment, the only sound inside the federal courtroom came from the faint hum of the overhead lights. Vanessa slowly looked up from the documents resting before her. Her hands remained steady. Her expression did not change. The courtroom had been preparing to hear a major ruling, and dozens of attorneys, clerks, journalists, and observers filled the room. Yet all attention shifted toward the entrance where Captain Ethan Walker stood surrounded by several uniformed officers. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed nobody could question his authority. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall courthouse windows, casting long golden reflections across the polished wood floor. Vanessa glanced at the officers, then at the warrant folder in Walker's hand. Around her, stunned whispers began spreading through the gallery. One reporter immediately reached for her phone. Another started typing furiously on a laptop. A young attorney sitting in the front row looked completely frozen. Nobody had ever witnessed anything like this. Walker took several steps forward. Judge Vanessa Brooks, you are being placed under arrest pending an ongoing criminal investigation. The words sent another wave of shock through the room. Several people gasped. A court clerk nearly dropped a stack of files. Vanessa remained seated for another second before calmly standing. Her black, judicial robe settled neatly around her shoulders. She looked neither angry nor frightened. If anything, she appeared concerned for the integrity of the process unfolding around her. Captain Walker, she said evenly, may I ask the basis for this action? Walker's jaw tightened. You will receive all necessary information at the appropriate time. Vanessa studied him quietly. The response seemed rehearsed. The tension inside the courtroom continued rising. Cameras appeared. Phones were raised. Reporters exchanged urgent messages. Outside the courtroom doors, courthouse employees began gathering to see what was happening. Walker appeared almost energized by the attention. Vanessa noticed that as well. Years on the federal bench had taught her how to read people. Some individuals respected power. Others became intoxicated by it. She slowly stepped away from the bench exactly as instructed. The courtroom remained silent as she descended the short staircase leading to the main floor. Every eye followed her. Every movement seemed magnified, yet her posture never changed. She carried herself. The events continued to develop with greater reflection from everyone involved. Observers paid closer attention to details. Conversations became more thoughtful, and the importance of evidence, patience, professional responsibility, and fairness became increasingly clear. The atmosphere allowed additional reactions, observations, and moments of consideration that reinforced the existing storyline without changing any of its facts or outcomes. Each stage of the situation encouraged deeper understanding of accountability, integrity, and the value of allowing truth to emerge through careful examination. With dignity, refusing to allow humiliation to dictate her behavior. Near the jury box, a court clerk named Melissa Reed watched the scene unfold with growing unease. Something about the warrant folder in Walker's hand felt wrong. She could not explain why. Not yet, but the feeling lingered. Vanessa noticed Melissa's expression and offered a small, reassuring nod. Then she turned back toward Walker. The captain believed he controlled the room. The reporters believed they were witnessing a career-ending scandal. The spectators believed they were watching the fall of a powerful judge. But as the fading sunlight illuminated the courtroom and long shadows stretched across the floor, nobody realized that this shocking arrest was only the beginning of a story that would soon expose far more than anyone expected. Vanessa Brooks stood calmly on the main floor of the courtroom while the shock around her continued to spread. Reporters whispered into phones. Attorneys exchanged nervous glances. Court employees stood, frozen near their desks. Yet none of it seemed to affect her. The late afternoon sunlight pouring through the tall courthouse windows painted the room in shades of gold and amber, reflecting softly across the polished wood panels and the seal of the court mounted high above the bench she had occupied only moments earlier. Captain Ethan Walker appeared, pleased with the attention. He stood with his shoulders back and his warrant folder tucked firmly beneath one arm, projecting absolute confidence. To everyone watching, it looked as though he controlled the situation completely. Vanessa slowly folded her hands in front of her and waited. She had spent most of her life learning the value of patience. Long before she became a federal judge, she had learned that dignity often mattered most when others tried to take it away. Her thoughts briefly drifted to a small apartment where she had grown up. She remembered evenings spent studying under dim kitchen lights, while her mother returned home exhausted from cleaning office buildings downtown. She remembered teachers who doubted her potential and classmates who assumed success belonged to someone else. Every obstacle had taught the same lesson. Let the facts speak louder than emotions. That lesson had carried her through college, law school, years of legal practice, and eventually onto the federal bench. Around her, the courtroom continued buzzing with speculation. A television reporter quietly told a producer that this story would dominate the evening news. A defense attorney shook his head in disbelief. A young law student seated near the gallery stared at the events continued to develop with greater reflection from everyone involved. Observers paid closer attention to details. Conversations became more thoughtful, and the importance of evidence, patience, professional responsibility, and fairness became increasingly clear. The atmosphere allowed additional reactions, observations, and moments of consideration that reinforced the existing storyline without changing any of its facts or outcomes. Each stage of the situation encouraged deeper understanding of accountability, integrity, and the value of allowing truth to emerge through careful examination. Vanessa as though witnessing history. Through it all, Vanessa remained composed. Melissa Reed watched from the clerk's station, unable to shake the uneasy feeling growing in her chest. She had processed thousands of court documents during her career. Warrants, orders, filings, appeals. Something about the folder in Walker's possession continued bothering her. She glanced toward it again. The cover page appeared ordinary at first glance, but the placement of one authorization stamp seemed unusual. Melissa frowned. Perhaps she was imagining it. Yet the feeling persisted. Nearby, Walker spoke quietly with one of his officers. His voice carried confidence, even arrogance. He behaved like a man who expected praise rather than scrutiny. Vanessa noticed that as well. Years on the bench had taught her that power often revealed character more clearly than pressure ever could. She looked toward Melissa and noticed the clerk studying the folder. For a brief second their eyes met. Melissa immediately looked away, uncertain why she felt compelled to keep examining the paperwork. Then a reporter asked Walker whether additional charges might follow. Walker smiled faintly before answering. The response triggered another wave of headlines and messages throughout the room. Yet while everyone focused on the public spectacle, Melissa quietly opened her computer and began reviewing federal records. She could not explain why. She only knew that something did not feel right. And as the courtroom remained captivated by the dramatic arrest, the first tiny crack in the story was about to appear. Melissa Reed stared at the computer screen while the courtroom remained consumed by the spectacle unfolding around Judge Vanessa Brooks. Reporters continued sending updates. Attorneys whispered among themselves. Court employees gathered near the walls, eager to witness what many believed would become one of the biggest legal scandals in recent memory. Yet Melissa found herself paying less attention to the crowd and more attention to the documents in front of her. Something continued bothering her. She opened the federal records system and entered several reference numbers from the warrant file she had briefly observed. The courthouse network responded almost instantly. Lines of data appeared across her screen. At first everything seemed normal. Then her eyes narrowed. One of the authorization codes looked unfamiliar. Melissa checked it again. Then a third time. The code existed, but not where it should have existed. A small knot formed in her stomach. Across the room, Captain Ethan Walker stood near the front of the courtroom, speaking confidently with members of the press. His reputation preceded him. Throughout the events continued to develop with greater reflection from everyone involved. Observers paid closer attention to details. Conversations became more thoughtful, and the importance of evidence, patience, professional responsibility, and fairness became increasingly clear. The atmosphere allowed additional reactions, observations, and moments of consideration that reinforced the existing storyline without changing any of its facts or outcomes. Each stage of the situation encouraged deeper understanding of accountability, integrity, and the value of allowing truth to emerge through careful examination. Many people viewed him as a powerful figure inside law enforcement. He seemed to enjoy that reputation. The attention surrounding today's arrest only appeared to strengthen his confidence. Every answer he gave reporters sounded polished. Every movement projected certainty. To the crowd watching, he looked like a man firmly in control. Vanessa stood quietly nearby. Her judicial robe remained perfectly arranged. Her posture never changed. The contrast between the two individuals could not have been more striking. One seemed energized by public attention. The other seemed completely detached from it. Melissa glanced toward Vanessa and wondered how she remained so calm. Most people would have reacted with anger, fear, or frustration. Vanessa displayed none of those emotions. She simply waited, as though she understood something others did not. Melissa returned her attention to the screen. The authorization code continued bothering her. She opened another database. Then another. Several minutes passed. Finally, she located a federal reference table connected to warrant validation procedures. Her heartbeat quickened. The code appearing on Walker's paperwork corresponded to an entirely different document category. Melissa blinked. That made no sense. She checked again. The result remained unchanged. The code did not belong on an arrest warrant. Nearby, one of Walker's officers laughed at a comment from a reporter. Walker smiled. He looked completely relaxed. Meanwhile, Melissa opened a secondary verification log used by federal courts. The system processed her request. A loading symbol spun briefly. Then the results appeared. Melissa's eyes widened. A timestamp attached to the authorization record showed a discrepancy. It was small, easy to overlook, yet impossible to ignore once noticed. She immediately searched for additional supporting records. Around her, nobody seemed aware of what she was discovering. The courtroom remained focused on headlines, speculation, and public perception. Only Melissa continued digging deeper. Vanessa remained silent. Walker remained confident. Reporters remained convinced they were watching a scandal unfold. But hidden inside the courthouse database, a different story was beginning to emerge. And with every new record Melissa uncovered, the foundation beneath Walker's certainty grew weaker. Melissa Reed felt her pulse quicken as she stared at the courthouse database. The discrepancy she had discovered refused to disappear. She refreshed the record. The same result appeared. She checked a second database, then a third. Every system pointed toward the same troubling conclusion. The authorization code attached to the arrest paperwork did not belong where it appeared. Across the courtroom, nobody seemed aware that the foundation beneath the entire case was beginning to crack. Reporters, the events continued to develop with greater reflection from everyone involved. Observers paid closer attention to details. Conversations became more thoughtful, and the importance of evidence, patience, professional responsibility, and fairness became increasingly clear. The atmosphere allowed additional reactions, observations, and moments of consideration that reinforced the existing storyline without changing any of its facts or outcomes. Each stage of the situation encouraged deeper understanding of accountability, integrity, and the value of allowing truth to emerge through careful examination. Continued filing updates. Spectators whispered among themselves. Attorneys exchanged theories about what charges might emerge next. Captain Ethan Walker stood near the front of the room answering questions with unwavering confidence. His reputation carried weight throughout the city. Many people viewed him as a man who always got results. Watching him now, it was easy to understand why. He projected certainty in every movement. Yet Melissa could not stop looking at the screen in front of her. Something was wrong. Vanessa Brooks remained standing quietly near the defense tables. The fading sunlight filtering through the courthouse windows illuminated the dark wood walls and cast long shadows across the floor. She appeared completely composed. Her calmness contrasted sharply with the growing tension surrounding her. Melissa glanced toward the judge. For a brief moment, she wondered whether Vanessa sensed the same thing she did. Years of courtroom experience had taught Melissa that truth often revealed itself through small details. A missing signature, an incorrect timestamp, a code that appeared where it should not appear. Those details rarely attracted attention at first, but they often changed everything. Melissa opened another verification log. This one connected directly to federal warrant processing records. The system required additional credentials. She entered them quickly. Several seconds passed while the database loaded. Her eyes remained fixed on the screen. Then the information appeared. Melissa leaned closer. Her stomach tightened immediately. The authorization sequence linked to the warrant had been generated hours before the supporting documentation existed. She blinked repeatedly. That should have been impossible. Official records followed a strict sequence. Supporting documents came first. Authorization followed afterward. Here, the timeline appeared reversed. Melissa checked the timestamps. Again, the discrepancy remained. Nearby, one of the reporters asked Walker whether additional arrests might follow. Walker smiled confidently before giving another polished answer. Cameras captured every word. Flashing notifications appeared on journalists' devices throughout the room. The public narrative continued growing stronger. Meanwhile, Melissa quietly opened yet another record. This time she searched the originating office responsible for the authorization. The result surprised her even more. The office code belonged to a federal division located hundreds of miles away. Why would a warrant connected to a local investigation originate there? The question immediately raised several more. Melissa felt a chill despite the warmth of the courtroom. She printed a copy of the records and reviewed them carefully. Every new detail created additional doubt. Across the room, Vanessa remained patient. Walker remained certain. The crowd remained convinced they understood the story. But the events continued to develop with greater reflection from everyone involved. Observers paid closer attention to details. Conversations became more thoughtful, and the importance of evidence, patience, professional responsibility, and fairness became increasingly clear. The atmosphere allowed additional reactions, observations, and moments of consideration that reinforced the existing storyline without changing any of its facts or outcomes. Each stage of the situation encouraged deeper understanding of accountability, integrity, and the value of allowing truth to emerge through careful examination. Hidden within the courthouse systems, facts were beginning to tell a very different story. And as Melissa gathered the documents into a neat stack, she realized she had uncovered enough information to raise a question that nobody in the courtroom was prepared to answer. Melissa Reed held the stack of printed records tightly as she looked across the courtroom. The weight of what she had discovered continued growing with every passing minute. Around her, the atmosphere felt completely different from when the arrest had first occurred. News of the incident had already begun spreading beyond the courthouse walls. Reporters moved constantly between phone calls and live updates. Legal analysts filled social media feeds with speculation. Some commentators were already discussing the possible end of Vanessa Brooks's career. Others debated what charges might emerge next. The public humiliation was unfolding in real time. Yet none of those people had seen what Melissa now held in her hands. Captain Ethan Walker appeared more confident than ever. Surrounded by cameras and attention, he looked like a man celebrating a victory. Several reporters gathered near him as he answered questions. His voice remained calm and authoritative. Every statement seemed designed to reinforce the belief that the arrest had been justified. Spectators listened carefully. Some nodded. Others quietly recorded his comments. Across the room, Vanessa remained composed. She stood near one of the courtroom tables beneath the warm glow of the fading evening light. The golden sunlight entering through the courthouse windows had begun giving way to softer shades of orange and blue. Long shadows stretched across the floor. Despite everything happening around her, Vanessa displayed remarkable patience. She did not argue with reporters. She did not challenge Walker publicly. She simply waited. Melissa looked down at the documents again. The timeline discrepancy remained obvious. The authorization sequence remained wrong. The originating office remained suspicious. Most troubling of all, a supporting verification number attached to the warrant failed to appear in any active federal registry. Melissa checked it again, then once more. The result never changed. The number did not exist. Her heart began beating faster. Official warrants could contain errors. Clerical mistakes happened. But multiple inconsistencies appearing together suggested something far more serious. Nearby, a group of attorneys quietly discussed the case. One shook his head and remarked that no judge could survive accusations of this magnitude. Another agreed. Their words reached Vanessa's ears. She showed no reaction. Years of experience had taught her that public opinion often moved much faster than truth. Melissa, the events continued to develop with greater reflection from everyone involved. Observers paid closer attention to details. Conversations became more thoughtful, and the importance of evidence, patience, professional responsibility, and fairness became increasingly clear. The atmosphere allowed additional reactions, observations, and moments of consideration that reinforced the existing storyline without changing any of its facts or outcomes. Each stage of the situation encouraged deeper understanding of accountability, integrity, and the value of allowing truth to emerge through careful examination. Admired that composure. Most people would have been overwhelmed by the pressure. Vanessa seemed anchored by something stronger. Meanwhile, Walker continued speaking with reporters. Flashing camera lights reflected from the polished wood surfaces throughout the courtroom. The scene increasingly resembled a media event rather than a legal proceeding. Melissa suddenly realized how dangerous that could become. Every minute that passed allowed assumptions to spread further. She knew she could not remain silent much longer. Gathering her courage, she organized the records into a clear sequence. The evidence needed to be presented carefully, properly, professionally. She took a slow breath and looked toward Vanessa. The judge noticed her immediately. Their eyes met across the crowded courtroom. Vanessa did not speak. She simply offered a small nod. It was enough. Melissa understood. The facts mattered more than the noise surrounding them. And as she began walking toward the court administrator's office with the documents in hand, she knew she was carrying information capable of changing the entire story. Melissa Reed stepped into the court administrator's office and carefully closed the door behind her. The noise from the courtroom immediately faded, replaced by a heavy silence that seemed to amplify every thought running through her mind. She placed the stack of documents on the desk and looked once more at the records she had spent the last hour examining. The inconsistencies remained exactly where she had found them. The authorization sequence was wrong. The verification number did not exist. The originating office did not match the jurisdiction involved in the case. Individually, each problem raised concern. Together, they painted a far more troubling picture. Outside the office window, the evening sky deepened into shades of blue and gold as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the city skyline. Melissa took a slow breath and began organizing the evidence into a timeline. She wanted facts, not assumptions. That was the lesson she had learned after years working inside the federal court system. Meanwhile, back inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted from shock to spectacle. Reporters continued discussing possible outcomes. Legal commentators speculated openly. Captain Ethan Walker remained surrounded by attention. He stood near the front of the room answering questions with the confidence of someone who believed the story had already been written. Every camera seemed pointed in his direction. Every microphone appeared eager for another quote. Vanessa Brooks stood quietly near a courtroom table, watching the scene unfold with remarkable calm. The fading light from the courthouse windows rested softly across her face. The events continued to develop with greater reflection from everyone involved. Observers paid closer attention to details. Conversations became more thoughtful, and the importance of evidence, patience, professional responsibility, and fairness became increasingly clear. The atmosphere allowed additional reactions, observations, and moments of consideration that reinforced the existing storyline without changing any of its facts or outcomes. Each stage of the situation encouraged deeper understanding of accountability, integrity, and the value of allowing truth to emerge through careful examination. She appeared thoughtful rather than worried, patient rather than defeated. Several attorneys who had known her for years remained nearby. They exchanged concerned looks, but respected her silence. Vanessa understood something many people in the room had forgotten. Public opinion could move quickly. Truth often moved slowly. Yet truth usually arrived eventually. In the administrator's office, Melissa completed her timeline and stared at the final page. The pattern was now impossible to ignore. The warrant records contained discrepancies that should have triggered immediate review long before any arrest took place. Her eyes settled on one final entry she had nearly overlooked. A secondary validation request appeared in the system logs. That alone was unusual. She opened the record. Seconds later, her eyes widened. Someone had attempted to verify the warrant earlier that day and received an error message. Melissa leaned closer to the screen. The request had been flagged automatically by the federal system. Yet somehow the process continued anyway. Her heartbeat accelerated. That detail changed everything. It suggested that warnings had existed before the arrest ever happened. Outside, the last rays of sunlight disappeared from the courthouse windows. The room beyond her office grew quieter as evening settled over the city. Melissa gathered every document into a single folder and stood. She knew she could not keep this information to herself any longer. Across the hallway, Vanessa remained calm. Walker remained confident. The reporters remained convinced they were watching the downfall of a federal judge. But hidden inside the records now resting beneath Melissa's arm was evidence that pointed in an entirely different direction. And somewhere beyond the courthouse walls, a response was already moving through federal channels toward the building. Melissa Reed pushed open the courtroom door and stepped back into the crowded room with the folder pressed firmly against her side. The atmosphere had changed little during her absence. Reporters still filled the gallery. Attorneys still exchanged theories. Captain Ethan Walker still stood near the center of the attention, speaking with the confidence of a man who believed the outcome had already been decided. Vanessa Brooks remained where she had been, calm and composed beneath the soft glow of the courtroom lights. Evening had fully arrived outside. The tall courthouse windows reflected the lights of the city, now shining against the darkening sky. Melissa moved quickly toward the court administrator and quietly handed over the documents. The administrator reviewed the first few pages, then the next several. His expression changed almost immediately. He looked up, then back. The events continued to develop with greater reflection from everyone involved. Observers paid closer attention to details. Conversations became more thoughtful, and the importance of evidence, patience, professional responsibility, and fairness became increasingly clear. The atmosphere allowed additional reactions, observations, and moments of consideration that reinforced the existing storyline without changing any of its facts or outcomes. Each stage of the situation encouraged deeper understanding of accountability, integrity, and the value of allowing truth to emerge through careful examination. Down, then up again. Without saying a word, he reached for a secure phone resting on a nearby desk. Several minutes passed. Nobody understood what was happening. Walker continued answering questions from reporters. Vanessa remained patient. Then the phone rang. The sound cut through the courtroom like a bell. The administrator listened carefully. His posture straightened. Every second seemed to increase the tension inside the room. Finally, he thanked the caller and slowly lowered the receiver. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had come before. He stood and addressed the room. There has been a federal verification review. Conversations stopped instantly. Reporters lowered their phones. Walker frowned. Melissa remained motionless. Vanessa watched quietly. The administrator opened the folder and removed several pages. The warrant presented today contains authorization records that do not match federal database entries. A murmur spread across the courtroom. Walker's confidence faded slightly. That is impossible, he said. The administrator continued. A secondary review has confirmed multiple discrepancies involving validation numbers, timestamps, and originating office records. The room fell silent again. Several reporters immediately began typing. Others stared at Walker. For the first time all evening, he looked uncertain. Then the courtroom doors opened. Every head turned. A federal marshal entered accompanied by two officials from the Regional Federal Oversight Office. Their presence changed the atmosphere instantly. They walked directly toward the administrator and reviewed the documents Melissa had uncovered. After several moments, the marshal turned toward the room. The warrant used in this action cannot be verified through federal authorization systems. The statement landed like a shockwave. Walker stared in disbelief. There must be a mistake. The marshal shook his head. The systems have been checked multiple times. Nobody spoke. The reporters who had spent hours documenting the downfall of a respected judge suddenly found themselves facing a completely different story. Vanessa remained perfectly calm. She neither celebrated nor reacted. The truth was simply arriving. The marshal continued. Until a complete review is conducted, the validity of this arrest action is formally in question. Walker's face lost color. Around the courtroom, people exchanged stunned looks. The narrative they had accepted only hours earlier was collapsing in real time. Melissa quietly exhaled. The evidence had spoken for itself. And as the realization spread through the room, one thing became unmistakably clear. The person who appeared most powerful when the evening began was no longer the person controlling the story. The courtroom remained silent long after the federal marshal finished speaking. The weight of the events continued to develop with greater reflection from everyone involved. Observers paid closer attention to details. Conversations became more thoughtful, and the importance of evidence, patience, professional responsibility, and fairness became increasingly clear. The atmosphere allowed additional reactions, observations, and moments of consideration that reinforced the existing storyline without changing any of its facts or outcomes. Each stage of the situation encouraged deeper understanding of accountability, integrity, and the value of allowing truth to emerge through careful examination. Revelations seemed to settle over every person in the room at once. Reporters who had spent the entire evening documenting the public downfall of Vanessa Brooks suddenly found themselves rewriting every headline. Attorneys exchanged stunned looks. Court employees stood motionless. The certainty that had filled the courtroom only an hour earlier had completely disappeared. Captain Ethan Walker remained near the center of the room, but the confidence that once surrounded him was gone. He looked toward the federal marshal, then toward the court administrator, then finally toward Vanessa. For the first time all evening, he appeared uncertain of what to do next. The bright lights from cameras no longer felt like a spotlight on Vanessa. They felt directed somewhere else entirely. Melissa Reed quietly stepped back toward her workstation. She did not seek attention. She did not expect recognition. She simply felt relieved that the records had been examined before the situation moved any further. Outside the courthouse windows, the city glowed beneath a blanket of evening lights. Reflections shimmered against the glass as traffic moved steadily through downtown streets. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had transformed from accusation to reflection. The federal marshal reviewed several final pages before closing the folder. "The matter will be referred for immediate review," he said calmly. Nobody argued. Nobody challenged the conclusion. The evidence had already spoken. Walker lowered his eyes briefly. Around him, reporters who had once rushed toward him now focused their attention elsewhere. Some directed questions toward the federal officials. Others looked toward Vanessa. Yet she remained exactly as she had been throughout the entire ordeal. Calm, patient, dignified. She neither celebrated nor expressed anger. Her composure seemed almost impossible to ignore. Eventually, Walker took a slow breath and stepped forward. The courtroom watched closely. "Judge Brooks," he said quietly. His voice sounded very different now. The arrogance that had marked his earlier statements had disappeared. "I believed I was acting on valid information." He paused. "But the facts show serious problems with what occurred here today." The room remained silent. Vanessa listened without interruption. Walker continued. "I should have demanded more verification before taking action." The admission hung heavily in the air. Several reporters immediately began typing. Yet Vanessa did not appear interested in the headlines that would follow. She simply looked at him and nodded once. Not because the situation had been acceptable, not because the damage had been insignificant, but because accountability mattered. Around the courtroom, people began seeing the entire day differently. They remembered the assumptions. The events continued to develop with greater reflection from everyone involved. Observers paid closer attention to details. Conversations became more thoughtful, and the importance of evidence, patience, professional responsibility, and fairness became increasingly clear. The atmosphere allowed additional reactions, observations, and moments of consideration that reinforced the existing storyline without changing any of its facts or outcomes. Each stage of the situation encouraged deeper understanding of accountability, integrity, and the value of allowing truth to emerge through careful examination. They remembered the whispers. They remembered how quickly many had accepted a narrative before examining the facts. Vanessa slowly looked around the room. The same spectators who had once watched her with suspicion now avoided her gaze. The lesson had reached everyone. Truth required patience. Justice required discipline. And appearances alone could never replace evidence. As the evening continued and courthouse staff began preparing to close for the night, the tension that had dominated the building slowly faded away. Yet one thing remained unmistakably clear. The story that began as an attempt to bring down a respected judge had become something entirely different. It had become a reminder that no position, no badge, and no authority was greater than the responsibility to seek the truth. The following morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the federal courthouse and painted the marble hallways with soft golden light. The building felt different from the night before. The tension, the speculation, and the noise had faded away, leaving behind only the quiet rhythm of public service returning to normal. Employees arrived carrying files and coffee cups. Attorneys moved through security checkpoints. Visitors filled the corridors. Yet beneath the ordinary routine lingered the memory of what had happened. Vanessa Brooks walked through the courthouse entrance with the same calm dignity she had carried throughout her entire career. She wore her judicial robe over a professional suit and greeted staff members with a warm smile. Some smiled back immediately. Others seemed unsure how to express their respect after witnessing the events of the previous evening. Vanessa made it easy for them. She treated everyone exactly as she always had. No bitterness, no anger, no desire for attention. Inside the courtroom, attorneys, clerks, and observers gradually took their seats. The room was full long before the morning session began. Word of the previous day's events had spread throughout the city. Many people expected a statement. Others expected frustration. Some expected retaliation. Instead, they watched Vanessa enter the courtroom and quietly take her place behind the bench. The room rose to its feet. The sound of chairs moving echoed through the chamber. For a moment, nobody spoke. Sunlight streamed through the windows and illuminated the seal of the court mounted high on the wall behind her. Vanessa looked across the room and saw familiar faces. She saw attorneys who had doubted, reporters who had speculated, employees who had worried. She saw Melissa Reed seated at her workstation, focused and professional as always. Their eyes met briefly. The events continued to develop with greater reflection from everyone involved. Observers paid closer attention to details. Conversations became more thoughtful, and the importance of evidence, patience, professional responsibility, and fairness became increasingly clear. The atmosphere allowed additional reactions, observations, and moments of consideration that reinforced the existing storyline without changing any of its facts or outcomes. Each stage of the situation encouraged deeper understanding of accountability, integrity, and the value of allowing truth to emerge through careful examination. Vanessa offered a small nod of gratitude. Melissa smiled. No words were necessary. The truth had found its way into the light because someone chose facts over assumptions. As proceedings began, the courtroom settled into silence. The work of justice continued. Cases were called. Arguments were presented. Evidence was examined. Everything unfolded exactly as it should. There was no dramatic speech. No public condemnation. No attempt to revisit the previous day. Vanessa understood that real strength rarely needed an audience. During a brief recess, several reporters gathered outside hoping for a comment. Vanessa paused near the courthouse steps before entering a waiting vehicle. Cameras focused on her. Microphones extended toward her. She simply smiled and said, "Every person deserves the same fairness we expect from the law." Then she thanked them and continued on her way. The statement appeared in headlines throughout the city by afternoon. Meanwhile, inside offices and conference rooms, people reflected on the lesson they had witnessed. Authority without accountability could create mistakes. Assumptions without evidence could create injustice. But patience, integrity, and truth remained stronger than all of them. As the sun began setting over the city once again, its light reflected from the courthouse windows and stretched across the streets below. Inside her chambers, Vanessa reviewed the final documents of the day before looking out at the skyline. The city moved forward. The court moved forward. Life moved forward. And in the quiet stillness of that moment, justice required no celebration. Its presence alone was enough.